Kia ora, my name's Sarah Kate Miller. I'm a lecturer here at AUT, and this is a first series of 6 topics in contemporary skill acquisition, where it's looking at how skill is taught, how we learn to be skillful, and it will cover some of the traditional models and look at some opportunities for how we can teach skill going forward. These resources are put together and you're more than welcome to use them. Please say that if you could acknowledge the university when sharing any of these slides. We're going to refer to a couple of textbooks today, and I'll come back and give more details about those. This topic today is going to cover, or this session today is going to cover 2 topics, so we'll break them up as we go along. But the first one is just general in terms of how do people learn skill. I've probably put up an opening question, and that is to think about different ways that people can learn to be skillful. So I've listed a few up there, but it may be a question that you might start with students about how do we actually start to learn to move differently, how do we learn a skill. We look at observational learning. It's got a large history, right back into caveman era. If you saw one caveman go into a cave, a lot of noise, suddenly a head comes rolling out. Second caveman goes in, a lot of noise, head comes rolling out. I don't think the third caveman might go in. So already observational learning has some history there. We could even go back to the Romans and the galley boats and people rowing in those boats, and if you didn't row in a certain way you'd get whipped, and others would soon look around pretty quickly to see what do you need to do to avoid being whipped. And so there's all those early stages around observational learning. It's happening right from when children are little babies. That then progress through, even as we go through some of the crafts of the masons, and people will be showing people how to perform crafts, whether it be making things or fixing things. And then finally we got through to the printing press, where the opportunity to share knowledge was then able to happen through books rather than just the spoken word. So that's sort of some of the history of observational learning. Rewards. That's got some history. Some of you will probably know about Pavlov's dogs. He had some dogs and he wanted them to see if he could change their behaviour in terms of association, and ringing a bell over a door, and the dog then associated the door opening, and he would salivate expecting food. And so there's that sort of reward associated there. Watson was a guy who was interesting. He had I don't know if you know about him, it's a little teddy bear example called the Little Albert Study. So if you get to YouTube that, called the Little Albert Study, and you never get away with it ethically now. And they took a child and he got used to all these comfy toys and rabbits and animals and this sort of stuff, and then they started to make a big bang, a loud noise when one of these furry animals was in front of him. He got to the stage where as soon as an animal was shown to him, he just got so scared and screamed. So you can see that there's this association and what's been rewarded. That sort of went on into the era of when they started making motor cars, and they took people who were relatively unskilled off the farms and taught them how to make small parts of cars, and you had the industry of people who would make the tyres and different parts of the car, and they'd reward them well with money, and so they'd be motivated to learn that particular skill. And then you've got the French, I think he's pretty sure he's French theorist, Thorndike, and he was quite interested in looking at how do you control behaviour or influence behaviour through reward, and he looked at how you train children. And I'll show you a quick YouTube clip, just so you know what it looks like. I won't play the whole thing, called The Law of Effect, and we're going to refer back to this video or this concept quite often during these 6 topics. Just see if the volume's going to work. If you have questions at any stage, do ask.
But how is a new skill learned? That was a question which began to fascinate Thorndike. To answer it, he built some ingenious puzzle boxes from which cats could only escape by operating latches.
And in you go.
The cat appears to be very clever in engineering its escape, solving the problem with a deftly placed paw and a push of its nose. But Thorndyke didn't believe that an animal, even a clever cat, understands the consequences of its behaviour. When he placed a cat in the puzzle box for the first time, Thorndyke was unable to see any evidence of flashes of insight. The successful actions appeared first by chance. He proved that the apparent cleverness arose by trial and error, and used graphs to measure the rate of learning. A well-practiced cat quickly recalls the actions that help it escape to its reward of food. If an action brings a reward, Thorndyke believed that that action becomes stamped into the mind. In his thesis, he explained further his ideas about learning, that behaviour changes because of its consequences. He called this his law of effect, which explained how even wild creatures develop new habits.
Stop one. So you can YouTube that law of effect, because I have done it with dogs as well. And probably the two things I think that stand out, and so the basis of the law of effect, that if, I might even have it on the next slide, that if action brings about a positive consequence, it's more likely to be repeated again. If it has a negative consequence, it's less likely to happen again. Now, it's not unlikely that it will happen again. It's a bit like when we get a speeding ticket. It probably might happen again, but that same sort of thing, people would think about that consequence and then maybe therefore slow down or something like when they're driving. But the other key part to Thorndyke's theory around the law of effect was the importance of trial and error, and that it's not a linear relationship between being in the box and suddenly be able to get out of the box. There has to be that time of exploring, and sometimes that might be really quite difficult and take quite a long time. But once someone has found their own solution or solved that problem, it's likely to have a stronger impact on them in the future rather than just telling them the answer. But really that trial and error is an important phase of the law of effect. There's also, I think it was called the law of exercise, but if something's done quite a lot more, then it's more likely to happen again. But the main thing here is that if you look at what's the consequence of that behaviour, i.e. if I, to say in a sporting example, if I chip the ball with my toe and it can go over someone's head and that was successful, I'm probably more likely to keep on repeating that. I think one example, probably from a rugby one, is you've got Perry Wepu, who was a really good rugby player and could pass right to left really well, not so good left to right. Yeah. And so therefore, when I threw it that way, it had a negative consequence. It might not have got to the person, it might not have had the speed or the accuracy, but I did it this way and I got rewarded and my teammates said, well done, so then he just learned just turn around and try and get the ball that way. So you have to be wary that sometimes if an action's getting rewarded, is it the action that you want? You know, you may well have a kid that can catch a ball underarm and they can do that, so then they try and find every way to catch the ball underarm, even when it's above their head or something like that. So it's trying to look at what's been rewarded. So sort of moved in the 50s away from some of this behaviourism, rewards type of era to something, it's in the literature sometimes it's talked about information processing or sort of a computerisation or programming type part, where they started to look at, well, what stimulus went into people and therefore that must have an effect on what came out. And it was almost looking at us like we were a type of a computer, or we just alter what information they get and therefore they'll perform differently. And that's not how brains tend to work in any way. And it sort of had this you'd have to assume that you had to be able to cognitively describe things and involved sort of a level of intelligence to be able to learn or perform skills. And so then you had in the 60s this old model of Fitz and Posner's 3 stages of learning, and this still gets talked about now. It was a theoretical model that was put forward, but never had the evidence to show that we go from the stage of being able to verbally talk and describe a task to then moving up to the associative stage, and then finally the autonomous stage. And so that's probably one of the drivers of looking at skill acquisition in this contemporary way through these modules, is to try and help us understand why potentially this model might not work, but also what model do we need to start understanding about how we develop skills, and that'll lead on in the subsequent topics. Some of the problems, I guess, is that if we had to go, well, people are going to behave based on the knowledge that they have, then they'll make a decision, or then you'd have to have a huge amount of knowledge about a lot of different possible solutions. So then, it's almost like you're filling up someone's brain like a computer, and it's just not possible. And it really looked at the person. They were removed from the environment that they were in, and so we sort of got to a stage where people were starting to look at, well, what was the environment that they were in? How does that determine what they were doing? I guess a little bit as well as some of those times that were happening is post-war, and also the emergence of, in this case I've got up here, a plane. And so they were going, well, through rewards and that type of, if we think about building the cars, it was quite easy rewards and simple tasks. It did have an outcome. It did work to a certain level. But how do we actually teach people to fly planes at speed now? Because that's quite a different kettle of fish, really. And so that's when they started to look at the other stimulus information, and especially about the environment, about how that shaped how the top pilots were performing in these planes. It wasn't just trying to give them more and more information. The information they were getting from the environment was really crucial. And that's where you sort of got to in the 1980s, where we got to a guy called Newell, and I'll talk to you a little bit about him over the next few weeks. Another video, I'm only going to show you a tiny bit of this, but I'd really encourage you to show students some of these videos. This guy here, Danny McGaskill, I think it is. Really amazing cyclist. And you can see when you watch him that it's not possible for him to perform the way he is based on a preset of ideas. He doesn't hop on his bike in this situation and go, I'm just going to sit on my bike and cycle in a certain way. You start to get an idea of the way he's moving is totally dependent on the environment that he's in. So I guess if we think about what does it mean to be skillful, the words that probably come about is that there's an effort part to it. So while I can run down the road, it's going to get to a stage where for me to be able to keep on running, I've got to be quite efficient. And so there's how do you be able to perform a skill, but be able to perform it in the most energy efficient way possible. And also that there's some sort of accuracy and consistency with the way that you're performing it. So, you're pretty sure it's going to end up in a result, but also that there is, as humans, we're quite good at finding the most energy efficient way of doing things. And even our students do that. What's the minimum track to be able to pass an assignment? Yeah. And when you look at little kids, they only either run or stop, where adults know if I just walk nice and slowly, I'll still get there because we're used to just those minimum outlays of energy. So people will find that actually if I could do a fake and run around someone, that's far more efficient than having to run back and forth and then try and get around that person. So as we become more skillful, there is a bit of an efficiency part there too. Just wanted to touch on one more thing, and I guess it ties in a little bit to Thorndike, and it also ties in even with Danny on the bike, is that you probably hear quite a lot is non-linear. And so I guess a good way to think about non-linear is to think about, well, what is linear? And that on the left-hand side here, if we look at, well, the amount of time I spend on something, I'm going to have an exponential increase in some sort of thing, whether it's a skill or whether I can throw further, run faster or something like that. Or actually what is more typical as a non-linear approach to becoming more skillful. And sometimes there'll be rapid rises, sometimes there'll be some plateauing, and then there'll also be those dips, especially when someone goes, so we've got someone who's not a very good catcher, they learn to catch underarm, they're on a bit of a trajectory, and actually if you say to start giving some high balls and they've got to reverse catch it, they'll actually get worse for a period of time before they can actually get the use of that skill. So it's not only allowing that non-linear to happen, but also the language that we use and the relaxedness, I guess, of allowing them to go through those phases, because it is that natural part. And as you can see with the cats in the boxes, you know, there is some trial and error, but then we know that when people find solutions for themselves, they're more likely to be repeated over time. And I guess it's sometimes the tennis or the golf coaches where you can easily tell someone how to do something and it will have a performance outcome, but will it have a long-term learning outcome? All right. So that's the first topic.
That makes sense. I'm just thinking about that last idea. Do you think it would be even better to put that, to introduce that earlier?
Introduce it earlier, I could
I don't know
do.
if it's something, because obviously we're talking about non-linear stuff
Yeah.
like right at the end, whereas actually it's kind of like,
So do we put that slide?
this is the underlying thing that we're trying to get you to understand, that we don't go from here to here to here to here.
Yeah,
There's going to be, you're going to learn something, then we're going to throw something at you, and you might feel like you've gone backwards.
yeah.
So getting them to understand that.
So-
But then I really liked the theory behind all those other little bits and pieces. So I don't know.
So I guess if you think about trying to engage your students the most, if you can give them an example, go, right, how do you learn? I mean, they won't remember learning to walk, but if you said, right, you've got a baby who's about ready to walk, if they practice each day, will they get the same amount better? Or if you're practicing the shot put, will you end up throwing a little bit further, you know, and increase, you know, it's...
I know. It makes perfect sense. I'm just thinking about, I've got a few ideas for little kind of student worksheets where they're like brainstorming it straight away. It's like, you know, how do you learn?
Yeah.
How do you learn?
Yeah.
And one of the things I've done with my kids before, because we still talk about cognitive, so they can't remember what it's like to be at a cognitive stage for most things.
Yeah.
I get them to write with the opposite hand.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's the best thing, because they're like, oh my God, I've actually got to even think, how do I hold a pen?
Yeah.
It's second nature to pick a pen up.
Yeah.
So those kind of things, like coming up with little tiny
Yeah.
activities.
We've done stuff with non-dominant arm throwing,
Yeah.
and especially,
We used to do a level 2 assessment like that.
yeah, especially really coordinated tasks like a shot put where you've got to spin. That's quite difficult non-dominant arm, or a javelin where you've got to run, obviously, and throw. So it's got multiple stages, because most of us can probably throw, but it's when you've got to then coordinate a spin and a summation of forces and all those sort of things to it that they'll probably really struggle. What I've done sometime I've got a picture of it later on, is having a rubbish bin in the corner and you go throw bits of paper at it, and you'll see that some will be all over the place, and but then they'll get quite tight and it will get quite close.
Yeah, that's the type of thing you could almost do in class. This whole series been, and then I'm just looking, put a fan on, introduce that environment thing.
Yeah,
You know, the old paper toss on your phone, we have to suddenly there's a fan there, and they actually learn how to adjust what they're doing.
Yeah.
That could be quite a good little practice.
the fan actually would be quite good, because then you throw it. You've got a hypothesis, and that's the challenging part, is that as adults and mature learners with kids, is that they already start hypothesising about how to do something, and so then they'll see the outcome, and then they'll start going for a bit more height or a bit more speed, or
that links back with all what you're talking about in regards to the trial and error thing as well. So if you can give, and I think for those kids, like I can see this being broken down quite easily, like go, right, this is a concept. And then go, right, that's a really simple practical that we don't even have to get the kids changed, we don't have to take them anywhere.
Yeah.
Because that is pure trial and error, and then introduce that concept of an environmental change.
Yeah. And then actually, because if you threw it, and I saw you do it, so observational learning, I go, oh, actually, you got too close to the fan, it spit it out, I might have to go lower. Yeah.
That could be just quite a good way, because obviously you don't want to necessarily do a whole lesson with the students, just being talked at or just going through. You want to kind of introduce and they let them have a go.
Yeah.
So the more things that we can come up with that there are little shoots. I've already got, you know, like first thing to ask the kids, how do you learn? And then later on, you talked about what it is to be skillful. Well then ask them.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is it? What does a skillful person look like to you?
Yeah.
How is that person more skillful than that person? So it's just kind of giving them little tiny 5-minute activities.
Yeah.
With, you know, we can come up with a worksheet that goes with it that's just a real simple tick box or fill in the blank type thing.
Yeah.
But then they might actually take away the key concepts without kind of just going.
Yeah, I put some notes, I think, online, because there's one I thought of for the punishment one. There's a game that some of my students that probably gave you guys already know, and there was 9 spots. I don't know if the camera was getting the whiteboard or not, but I wonder if I can draw it. So if I just went and put in a blank slide, whoops, there it was before. And geez, this is a new bloody computer for me. Let's take all that out. Anyway, forget about that. But there was 9 dots on the ground, you know, those rubber dots, and someone had decided what was the correct route through the dots. So it might have been going, so they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They might go, right, you've got to go 2, then 6, then 5, then 6. Yeah, so they've got a route in their mind. And so then a person goes, you either got where no one watches, just one person goes, and they step on it, and the person goes, no. So they come back. The next time they know they got punished for going there. So then they'll go, a different one. Oh, yes, okay, this is rewarded me. Okay, I'll keep going. Yeah. And then they'll go, and this one, yes, okay. So now they start to know the route, and then they get penalised and back again. They've got to try and figure out the route.
So, minefield type thing.
Yeah. But you could do it either with a person just by themselves, so they were allowed to see their peers. But if you had someone that might have been a bit more complicated, but if you saw your peers go, oh, okay, she got beeped out there, this way I've got to remember. So you could sort of bring in a bit of the law of effect and a bit of that.
That's a really easy one to set up as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I put that one on my notes. But we can, it's probably quite good to talk about it now.
Yeah, so one of the things I wrote down was like going, how can we come up with a practical link with a positive and negative outcome? Because the trial and error, I think, would be quite easy to do.
Yeah.
But obviously you want to still have that positive and negative.
So your dots one would probably be the positive, negative, minefield one, but also could tie in with observational learning.
Yeah, whereas the one that you did on the PENS conference, was it you or was it Tony did the one with the bucket?
The buckets, yeah.
That was a bit of, you know, your trial and error stuff as well. You could argue there was a bit of positive, negative in there when we didn't follow that.
Yeah, you know, you could do that.
You could do something simple like that. Because that's things you don't want to make it a specific sport all the time.
No.
You want to try and just show different contexts and different ways in which they can actually experience it without it being right, we're going to do netball shooting or we're all going to kick a football.
Yeah.
Just trying to mix that there.
But you can see with the law of effect that if an outcome is successful, they'll keep on doing it. And so really with early learners, either young kids or one starting a new sport, how important it is for them to try different ways of finding their own solutions, because they do need lots of different ways to catch a ball, throw a ball, whatever. And if they only get rewarded for one, or if it has such a great result.
Yeah, that's what you said. If an action is getting rewarded, is that the action that you actually want? And so how can you kind of get them to learn different ways?
Yeah.
Now I look at kids, they always catch like this and they don't actually know. Okay, they've learned to move further away.
Yeah.
But is that actually what we want them to do all the time?
And that's when I think the language becomes quite important. So if they are catching, show me another way. Is there another way you can do this? Right, with partners, see how many ways you can come up with. And so it's always promoting the trial and error and the language.
Yes, that's probably some of the language stuff that we need to make sure we put in that teacher kind of information, so that it's not just like go and try that. Or how can you ensure you catch it all? Yeah,
and that's where probably the language is really important, and also the behaviour of the teacher. So You know, if you're just rewarding a great outcome, they're probably likely just to repeat that same outcome and not look for different ways to do that. Or rewarding the trial. Hey, I like the idea there, nice with the inside foot, give it another go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those sorts of bits of language. But yeah, they will see others do it a certain way and try and probably mimic them.
Mm.